Welcome to NIF Conversations. I am Ramachandra Guha, and we in each episode discuss a book written by a fellow of the New India Foundation. And today I have with me Indira Chowdhary, who's written this wonderful book, Growing the Tree of Science, which is an institutional history of the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. So thanks, Indira, for being with us. And first of all, when you think of the TiFR, of course, you think of several individuals, and most importantly, Homi Bhabha. And it's hard to think of a modern Indian who had so many extraordinary interests as him. But would you say, despite his interest in music, in art, he was essentially a scientist?
Well, he was an unusual scientist. Though he was essentially a scientist, I think what is interesting about him is that if you look at his institute, he has early Hussains, he has Kishan Khanna, he has the Bombay Progressives. So there's quite a lot of art that is included within his institution, and that was criticized. In fact, it was criticized in Parliament.
Because he spent public money on it, or
spending money on
yeah.
it. But his thing was that I'm spending just 1% of my budget, and he had Nehru's permission to do that. And I find that what he's doing in the early years of the institute is also taking the scientists off to see art exhibitions. And Mulk Raj Anand writes about that, saying you were really the complete man because you did this for your scientists. So in my book, I talk a bit about how this was also training them in this larger international arena to which they'll now belong. So they can discuss art as well as science. You know, it's a part of that. It's a subtler pedagogy.
And I mean, this is the 1940s, and it's 10 years later in 1959. I think that C.P. Snow gives his famous lecture on the two cultures, saying the scientists and people in humanities can't talk, but Bhabha is already making them talk early on. Yeah.
From 50s onwards, he's collecting, paintings. And Hussain's famous mural called Bharat Bhagya Vitata is in TiFR today, which Hussain, when I spoke to him, was very, very proud of it. He said, as a young artist, nobody really cared where I worked or what I did, but Bhabha gave me a room.
Okay.
And I was in that room. I took 2 years only because I could enjoy that. And I did this mural, and I would interact with scientists. So he was trying something quite different.
I suppose there is a kind of Indian parallel to Bhabha. Clearly, he and Raman are different because Raman is all about science. But someone like P.C. Mahalanobis, the statistician and physicist, who sets up the ISI but is interested in Tagore, is interested in literature, and also has an international perspective. I think what is common to Mahalanobis and Bhabha is that they both wanted to set up a world-class institute in India.
Absolutely.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. Though I think they end up having clashes later on, and they're not quite, Mahalanobis is the senior scientist, but Bhabha is trying to grow something, and I feel his mentoring of young scientists at that, in the 40s and 50s is really quite different, and he gets very busy with atomic energy. That's when the scientists are not meeting him as often to discuss things. So I think, that happens because, you have this figure of Bhabha who's trying to do everything, meet the Prime Minister, go and do his atomic energy work. And at that point, you asked a question about whether he was primarily a scientist. He stops publishing in 54.
Okay.
So that is the end. I mean, he's quite clear, and this is what even people at the institute say, that one thing about him was that he, when he stops publishing, he even begins to address himself as Dr. Bhabha and no longer Professor Bhabha.
Okay.
He was professor, but he says,
but still has the capacity to recognize brilliance in young scientists and nurture them. I mean, he may not be publishing himself, but he builds an institute of quality which is so rare.
Yes, and he is there every Friday for the colloquium. Whoever's giving a colloquium, he's there, he's asking them questions. So the institute remains very dear to him.
Yeah.
And after 54, if you look at the 60s, Obaid Siddiqui or Govind Swarup, these are people he hires.
And I think we should say a little bit about them to the viewer who may not know. I mean, Obaid Siddiqui is India's preeminent biologist, and Govind Swarup, India's greatest astronomer. And they're both found, in a sense, mentored by Baba, or brought back from abroad. From abroad, they could have great careers abroad, and they come back. Yeah,
yes, they come back. And what is interesting is Siddiqui is trying. I mean, he writes to S.N. Bose. He writes to various institutions, but it is Baba who writes to him first. Similarly with Govind Swarup, they write to various institutions, and it is Baba who gets back immediately and tells them, you know, you can come back, we will, you know, support your project. And of course, Govind Swarup is coming back to build this massive instrument.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it does take something to say, come here.
That's right. And you said, so he builds his TIFR, Baba, and then he brings in people, Govind Swarup and Obaid Siddiqui, who then nurture their own world-class institutes. I mean, we are in Bangalore, and the National Center for Biological Sciences, where you worked, and which is arguably our finest science institute, is a kind of grandchild of Baba, you could say, because you could say that. Yeah.
You know, and one of the things, and this is one of the arguments in my book, that if you say that your institution has a legacy, for the legacy to be really alive, you need to reinterpret it. You need to make it your own. And Siddiqui does make it his own. And he begins, when I'm talking to him about NCBS, he says, you know, one of the things that people do often in India is they look for their own clones. And they start, you know, building an institute that will only...
You know, we were talking about Baba's ability to find high quality scientists abroad, bring them back and let them grow, and further grow the tree of science in multiple ways. But there were also people in his institute with whom he had differences. For example, in your book you talk about the great mathematician and historian D.D. Kosambi, who started as a mathematician, is more famous as a historian, worked in TIFR, but I think the dynamics didn't really work.
Well, there were complicated reasons for that.
Right.
One, as I've tried to show, that what happens in TIFR is that you have Baba and you also have KC, K. Chandrasekhar, who is growing the mathematics school and actually encouraging lots of young mathematicians to, you know, take certain questions forward, and they really become cutting edge quite quickly. He joins in 49, and by the 50s they're really highly respected. Kosambi had joined the institute in 45 and he was, even at that point, he continued living in Pune and coming every day to TIFR, and he would never stay back for anything that needed him to stay back. But what happens is that he does interact with the early cosmic ray physicists, helps them with, you know, statistical analysis, and he's pretty much left to whatever he wants to do. The School of Mathematics, which grows from 49, becomes something that has a focus. And they find that Kosambi is not quite within, with them. But meanwhile, Kosambi, who regrets doing this later, also publishes in a paper in which he says that he has solved the Riemann hypothesis. And obviously this group is really very upset. And they start telling Baba that, you know, we feel very ashamed that this has happened. I mean, the way this institute has nurtured the idea of how you do science, how your facts are checked, what is a review. We'd like this to be reviewed. Is it true that he's solved this particular hypothesis? And Kosambi's paper is then taken and it's reviewed by mathematicians in Princeton and elsewhere, and they say no, this is not solving the Riemann hypothesis. That paper was published in the Indian Journal for Agricultural Statistics. And
totally obscure place,
and it's completely, it's seen as a false claim, and they're very ashamed of it. Bhabha doesn't renew Kosambi's contract at that point. He's not thrown out, but his contract.
But in a sense, you could say that that frees Kosambi for historical work at which he's probably better.
Yes, but it is something that rankles, and the way the institute talks about its legacy, it talks only about KC. It doesn't talk about Kosambi at all.
And of course, they produce so many mathematicians. Since the TiFR is soon going to be 70 years old, and it's rare in India to set up an institution of high quality that outlives its founder by so long. It will be 40 years since Bhabha died.
Absolutely.
Right. Or 50 years since Bhabha died. 50 years since Bhabha died. And so, one could argue that, of course, he was helped by Nehru, his special relationship with Nehru. But what are the lessons for institutional building in India? I mean, why are institutions like TiFR so rare? I mean, would you like to say a little bit about this?
Well, one of the things that, while doing not only this book, but other institutions that I've helped set up archives for, I noticed that TiFR was special because the individual was given a place.
Okay, yeah.
The individual didn't get lost in this, larger, scheme of things.
Yeah.
And I feel there was also the finances to support research, which may not be the case any longer. I mean, I think, science institutions are really right now very, very worried about their funding. But I think you find that that was probably one of the reasons that people felt a little free to carry on research.
And I suppose that is, as you to go back to what you said, Bhabha did not want to produce clones of himself, and in that sense, your book, I hope, is very widely read because of what it says, the richness of his research using oral histories and archival stuff, but also as a kind of template for how to run high quality institutions in India.
I think that remained, because one of the things, and this was more to do with NCBS, and this has to do with the registrar of a place where you were, which is CSSC. And I remember when I was in NCBS, I went and met Shushanto
the
Ghosh, registrar,
yeah.
And I said, come and see this institute where I am.
Right.
And he came, and I was wondering, what will he say about it? And he looked at it and he said, in India we've never learned how we should spend the money. We often want to, be very tight-fisted about spending on the institution. And most institutions end up looking really like PWD places. And he said, this is so beautiful that they have procured the money and they've spent it, and people feel very comfortable. And I think, that there was something there, he was telling me. And I feel that Bhabha, when he's, nurturing the gardens, saying my scientists have to get out of the lab and walk by the sea, there is some thinking about the lives they lead outside of their labs.
Yeah, which can then go and enrich the life in the lab too. Because
I think that is something that I feel TiFR kept, and you find that there is a lot of thinking around what is the welfare of the scientist, what is that space that you'll give him.
Well, thanks so much, Indira. Thank you for being with us, and thank you above all for so richly documenting the history of Tata Institute of Fundamental Research.
Thank you, because without the NIF, I don't think this would.
No, but it's a great privilege to have published it, and we hope that it will inspire other such books of high quality Indian institutions. Thanks.
Thank you so much.